There are 7 songs the world was never meant to hear. Not because they sound terrifying, but because they remember who listened. The basement archive had no windows, only concrete walls that absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. That was why Elias Crow preferred it. Silence behaved differently there. It pressed closer, heavier, as if listening back. Elias was an audio archivist, though few people still used that term. In an age of cloud storage and instant deletion, his work felt obsolete. He specialized in lost sounds, forgotten recordings, banned broadcasts, damaged tapes no one wanted to remember. Music labels hired him occasionally, universities even less. Mostly, he worked alone. That night, rain hammered the city above, leaking through the ceiling pipes in slow, rhythmic drops. Elias sat hunched over his workstation, cataloging a box of unmarked reel-to-reel tapes recovered from an abandoned radio station scheduled for demolition. No dates, no names, just dust and the faint smell of old metal. He logged them one by one, cleaning corrosion, repairing broken spools. Most were mundane talk shows, classical rehearsals, political speeches drowned in static. Then he reached the last box. Unlike the others, this one was sealed with black wax. Elias frowned. Wax seals were archaic, unnecessary. Someone had gone out of their way to close it. The surface of the box bore a strange symbol burned into the wooden, not carved, but scorched, as if branded by heat. 7 vertical lines crossed by a single horizontal slosh. He should have stopped there. Curiosity, however, had always been his weakness. Inside were 7 reels and 1 empty slot. Each reel was wrapped in brittle paper, labeled only with a single word written in different handwriting styles. Some were shaky, some precise. One looked like it had been written by someone whose hands trembled uncontrollably. Elias felt an unexpected chill. He examined the first reel more closely. The tape itself was discolored, warped slightly, as if exposed to extreme heat. When he placed it near the playback machine, the speakers emitted a low hum despite the power still being off. That had never happened before. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the switch. His rational mind supplied explanations. Residual current, faulty wiring, coincidence. He turned the machine on. Static filled the room. Not the chaotic hiss Elias knew well, but something patterned, almost rhythmic. Then a voice emerged, not singing, not speaking either. It sounded like someone reading a medical report in a whisper. Syllables stretched thin, barely human. Elias Frosi. The voice described burns. 3rd degree. Upper torso. No screaming. No emotion, only clinical detachment. Beneath it, a distant wail rose and fell, eerily similar to an ambulance siren, yet distorted, as if heard underwater. Elias stopped the tape abruptly. His heart pounded. He glanced at the monitor. The waveform displayed spikes that didn't align with any known audio pattern he'd studied. Worse, the recording duration kept changing. It read 6:12, then 6:45, then 7 o'clock. The tape was growing longer. He ejected the reel and wrapped it back in its paper, hands unsteady. That was when he noticed something else. The empty slot. It wasn't labeled like the others. Instead, the wood beneath it was scratched repeatedly, forming shallow grooves as if someone had tried to carve words but failed. Elias leaned closer, angling his desk lamp. The scratches formed a sentence. There were 7. There must always be 7. A sudden pressure filled the room, like air before a storm. Elias felt watched not from behind, but from everywhere at once. The hum returned, louder now, vibrating through the floor, the walls, his bones. He stepped back from the table. "That's enough," he muttered, though no one had spoken. The archive lights flickered. For a split second, his reflection in the glass of the recording booth looked wrong-blurred, stretched, as if heat warped it from the inside. When the light stabilized, the reflection returned to normal. Elias exhaled shakily. He told himself it was exhaustion. He had been working too long, sleeping too little. Still, as he shut down the equipment and prepared to leave, he felt an inexplicable certainty settle in his chest. Those tapes were not merely recordings. They were incomplete, and somehow without asking, without consent, he had just been chosen to listen. Above him, The rain stopped. Below, in the silence of the archive, the sealed box creaked softly, as if something inside had shifted, waiting for the next song to be played. Elias did not sleep that night. When he finally left the archive, dawn had already begun to pale the sky, but the world felt muted, as if sound itself had been drained of color. Eventicities, usual morning noise engine-y voices. Footsteps seemed distant, wrapped in cotton. At home, Elias sat at his kitchen table, staring at his recorder. He had brought nothing with him from the archive, yet something followed him nonetheless. A pressure lingered in his ears, subtle but constant, like standing too close to invisible machinery. He poured coffee. The liquid trembled before settling. Every archivist knew the rule: never let curiosity override documentation. And yet, instead of filing a report or contacting the station that had supplied the tapes, Elias found himself opening his notebook to a blank page and writing a single question. Where is the 7th recording? The question felt wrong the moment he finished it, as if he had spoken aloud to someone listening. By midday, Elias returned to the archive. The sealed box sat exactly where he had left it, untouched, its wax unbroken. Still, something about it felt different. The air around the work table seemed denser, charged. Elias powered on his equipment slowly, methodically, grounding himself in routine. He chose the second reel. This one was cold to the touch and naturally so. As the tape began to spin, a somber melody filled the room. It was slow, melancholic, almost beautiful. A piano line drifted through static, accompanied by a weary voice singing in a language Elias barely understood. Yet the sadness in it was unmistakable. As the song played, Elias noticed his breathing had changed. Each inhale felt heavier than the last. Memories surfaced, unbidden failures he rarely acknowledged, people he had disappointed, words left unsaid. The melody did not accuse. It simply lingered, patiently reopening wounds. Then came the silence. The song ended, but the machine kept running. Elias leaned forward. The waveform continued to pulse, though no sound emerged. He adjusted the gain. A faint scratching noise surfaced, like pencil on paper. Words began to form. Names. Dates. Each one followed by the same notation. Sunday. Elias stopped the tape before it finished. His hands shook not from fear, but from an overwhelming sense of despair that had no clear source. He stood abruptly, pacing the room until the weight on his chest eased. This was no ordinary curse, he realized. These recordings were not violent by default. They were selective. They burrowed into the listener, searching for weakness. Elias turned his attention to the remaining reels. 6 tapes. One missing. The empty slot gnawed at him. It was not absence that disturbed him, but implication. If there were supposed to be 7, then something or someone was unaccounted for. He checked the station, his intake logs. The box had arrived anonymously, delivered by courier. No return address. No digital footprint. Surveillance footage from the loading bay showed nothing but static during the delivery window. That had never happened before. Late in the evening, Elias heard it. A faint, clicking noise, not from the speakers but from behind him. He turned. The empty slot in the box had changed. Where bare wood had been, there was now a thin reel of tape slowly forming, strand by strand, as if woven from shadow. The machine beside it powered on by itself, its screen flickering. Track 7. Listener Elias stepped back, heart racing. No, he whispered. The tape finished forming and slid smoothly into place, locking with a soft mechanical click. The speakers crackled, then went silent. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Elias heard breathing. His own. His septe Washington breathing like that. The sound came from the speakers, ragged, uneven, terrified. Beneath it, a barely audible whisper emerged, layered over itself, repeating in countless overlapping voices. You have heard 6. You will complete the 7th. Elias reached for the power switch, but the machine refused to shut down. The waveform spiked violently, forming a shape that mirrored a human pulse. The realization struck him with sudden clarity. The 7th tape was not a song. It was a roll. And by listening, by documenting, by searching for meaning. Elias had already begun recording at one breath, one heartbeat, one moment of dread at a time. As the lights dimmed, Elias understood the final truth of the cursed collection. The songs did not exist to be preserved. They existed to make sure there was always someone left to listen. Elias avoided the archive for 3 days. He told himself distance would dilute whatever influence the recordings had over him. He worked from home, digitizing harmless field subway ambience, old interviews about extinct birds, normal sounds, safe sounds. It didn't help. At night, Elias dreamed of heat, not fire exactly, but the sensation of being too close to its skin tightening, air shimmering, pain suspended just before it arrived. He always woke before the worst part, heart racing, sheets damp with sweat. On the 4th morning, an envelope waited on his kitchen floor. No stamp, no address, no sign of forced entry. It was thin, hospital white, with his name typed neatly on the front. Inside was a single page. The paper smelled faintly of antiseptic. The letter was written in clinical language, detached and precise. It described a female patient admitted with extensive 3rd-degree burns across the upper body. Facial features no longer distinguishable. Vocal cords damaged, survival deemed unlikely. At the bottom was a signature, a doctor whose name Elias recognized. The man had died 15 years ago. Elias returned to the archive before sunset. He did not approach the box immediately. Instead, he checked the building's internal logs, searching for any record of entry during the past 3 days. There were none. No badge scans, no motion alerts. The envelope lay on his work table now, though he did not remember bringing it with him. Slowly, reluctantly, Elias took out the first reel again. The tape felt warmer than before. As it played, the room filled with that same unsettling soundscape, not music, not noise, but something in between. Metallic drones vibrated beneath a flat, emotionless voice, describing pain without ever acknowledging it. This time, Elias did not stop the tape. The sound deepened. The siren-like wail grew closer, stretching unnaturally, bending pitch in ways that made his stomach churn. The voice continued, now less composed, as if the speaker were struggling to maintain distance from the subject. Then something changed. Another voice joined in. Faint, hoarse, female. She did not scream. Spoke. Her words were fragmented, syllables slurred as if her mouth no longer functioned properly. Still, Elias understood enough. She was aware of her body, of her reflection, of the nickname whispered by nurses who thought she couldn't hear. Hamburger lady. The lights flickered. Elias smelled burning meat. He gagged, clamping a hand over his mouth. The heat from the speakers intensified, warping the air above them. His skin prickled painfully, though the room temperature remained unchanged. On the glass wall of the recording booth, a shape appeared. At first, it looked like condensation. Then Elias realized it was fingerprints smeared, uneven, as if pressed by hands that no longer had skin to protect them. They slid downward slowly. The voice on the tape faltered. The woman tried to laugh. It came out wrong. Elias tore the headphones from his ears and staggered back, knocking over his chair. The tape continued playing, unaffected, as if it no longer required him. The fingerprints multiplied. A figure began to take shape behind the glass, blurred, trembling, vaguely human. Where a face should have been, there was only texture, raw and undefined. Elias slammed the emergency power switch. The machine died instantly. The room fell silent. The heat vanished. The smell dissipated. The glass was clean again. Elias collapsed into his chair, gasping. Minutes passed. Maybe more. When his breathing finally steadied, he noticed something new on his work table. Another letter. This one was handwritten. The pen strokes were shaky, uneven, as if written with immense effort. He listens. The letter read, "So I can still speak." Elias stared at the words, dread settling deep in his chest. The recording hadn't been a story. It had been a conduit. He examined the reel more closely now. noticing subtle variations in the tapes, surface indentations that hadn't been there before. It was as if something had pressed outward from within, trying to escape. Elias wrapped the reel carefully, sealing it inside a fireproof case. His hands bore faint red marks now, patterned like fingerprints that did not belong to him. As he locked the case and logged the recording under restricted status, a grim understanding took hold. The songs were not cursed because they killed. They were cursed because they preserved pain, awareness, consciousness trapped in sound, sustained only when someone was listening. Elias glanced toward the sealed box. 6 reels remained, and somewhere within the silence of the archive, the woman without skin waited patiently for the next listener to press play. The sirens began outside the archive. At first, Elias thought they were real ambulances threading through the city streets. Distant, but familiar. He ignored them, focusing on inventory reports, forcing his mind back into professional order. But the sound did not fade. It lingered, circling, stretching unnaturally long between rises and falls. By midnight, Elias understood the truth. The sirens were not outside. They were inside his head. Every time he closed his eyes, the sound sharpened. It did not grow louder, but closer, as if the distance between him and some unseen emergency was steadily collapsing. His ears rang constantly now, even in silence, like a warning tone that refused to switch off. Elias stopped listening to music entirely. No radio, no headphones. Even the hum of appliances made him flinch, yet sound continued to find him regardless. At home, the kettle screamed like a patient in distress. The elevator cables wailed as if under strain. Once half asleep, Elias swore he heard footsteps pacing in rhythm with a heart monitor. He returned to the archive each day because it was the only place where the phenomena felt contained. That illusion shattered on the 7th night. Elias was reviewing non-audio materials. When the motion sensor in the hallway activated, the lights flicked on one by one, though no one had entered. He stood slowly, pulse quickening, and stepped into the corridor. The siren's sound returned low, distant, echoing through concrete. Then, he saw Italiano. At the far end of the hallway, the emergency exit sign glowed brighter than normal, bathing the walls in red. Beneath it stood a figure, unmoving. Elias knew better than to approach. Still, his feet carried him forward. Each step. The heat increased not. Overwhelming, but suffocating. Like standing too close to industrial machinery. The air shimmered. The smell followed shortly after. Burned flesh, the figure lifted its head. Where eyes should have been were only dark hollows. The body was wrapped in something that might once have been skinned, now stretched thin and uneven. Clinging desperately to muscle beneath, it opened its mouth. No sound emerged. Instead, Elias felt the words inside his skull. You stopped listening. He stumbled backward, crashing into a wall. The heat vanished instantly. The siren cut off midnight. The hallway was empty. The emergency exit sign returned to its usual dim glow. Elias slid down the wall, trembling. From that night on, the archive changed. Mirrors fogged without moisture. Metal surfaces retained warmth long after contact. Elias began finding burn marks in places he had not touched, faint handprints on desks, scorched outlines on the edges of doors. The fireproof case containing the first reel rattled occasionally, as if something inside shifted position. Elias tried documenting the events, but language failed him. Words flattened the experience, stripped it of its immediate sound. He realized, was the only medium that mattered now. That realization terrified him. The sirens returned every night at exactly 12:17 a.m. Always the same interval, always the same rhythm. Elias began to fear sleep. One morning, he discovered blisters on his forearms. Small, angry patches of skin, tender to the touch. The doctor found no explanation. Elias did not mention the sirens. He stopped leaving the archive altogether. Isolation seemed safer than exposure. The outside world felt hostile, full of unpredictable noise. Inside, at least, the rules were consistent even if they were cruel. On the 12th night, Elias woke to silence. No ringing, no hum, no sirens. Relief washed over him, brief, fragile. Then he noticed the smell. The archive was warm now, far warmer than it should have been. Lights flickered overhead as Elias made his way to the recording room. The sealed box sat open on the table. The fireproof case was cracked. The first reel lay exposed, the machine powered on by itself. Elias shouted, rushing forward, but stopped when the speakers emitted something new. Breathing. Steady. Controlled. Not his. The siren sound faded in beneath it. Softer now, almost soothing. The woman's voice returned, not fragmented this time, but clearer, more focused. "I remember," she said. The waveform stabilized, forming a clean, repeating pattern. Elias realized, with a sinking dread, that the longer he avoided listening, the stronger the manifestation became. Silence did not weaken the curse. It starved, Italiano, and starvation made it desperate. As the heat climbed, and the sirens harmonized with the woman's voice, Elias understood the unspoken rule of the cursed songs. They did not want to be heard once. They demanded to be heard again. And then yet they would make themselves impossible to ignore. Elias marked the date on the whiteboard in the archive's main room. Sunday. He had not planned it that way. The realization came only after he checked the calendar twice, then a third time, hoping he had misread it. The sirens had faded into a low, constant ache behind his ears, replaced by something quieter but more insidious, a melody he could not remember learning. It followed him everywhere. Not as sound, exactly, but as structure. His thoughts began to move in slow, descending patterns. Every idea returned to the same emotional key: regret, longing, finality. Even neutral memories bend toward sorrow. Elias recognized the danger immediately. This was the second recording at work. He had not played it again since the first encounter, but he no longer needed to. The song had embedded itself somewhere deeper than memory, resurfacing whenever his mind drifted. He forced himself into motion. Routine, he reminded himself. Routine was resistance. In the archive's historical database, Elias accessed international death records from the mid-1930s. He filtered by location, then by date. Hungary, 1936. Sundays, the screen filled with entries. Too many. Notes accompanied several of them, anomalies flagged by clerks decades ago and forgotten since. Unusual circumstances. Music present at scene. Sheet paper found clenched in hand. Elias opened one scanned report. A man found seated at a cafe table before opening hours. No signs of struggle. A gramophone beside him, needle still resting on vinyl. The report noted the expression on the man's face with unsettling precision. Peaceful, almost relieved. Another file described a woman discovered in her apartment bathtub. The water had gone cold. On the floor nearby lay handwritten lyrics in Hungarian, ink smeared by tears. Every report ended the same way. Sunday. The melody sharpened. Elias leaned back, closing his eyes. Immediately, the song surged forward, not loudly, but clearly. A weary voice sang of waiting, of promises made to someone who would never return. The sadness was intimate, persuasive. It did not command death. It invited Italiano. "You can rest now," the song seemed to say. "You have suffered enough." Elias slammed his palm against the desk, breaking the spell. His heart pounded violently, anger cutting through despair. "This isn't consent," he muttered. "It's coercion." He understood then why the song had been banned. Not because it caused death directly, but because it dismantled resistance. It reframed despair as comfort. The archive lights dimmed slightly. Elias looked up. Across the room, the sealed box vibrated almost The second reel pulsed, with a faint glow, as if warmed from within. A thought occurred to him, one he did not like. What if the song required timing? What if it only reached its full effect on the day it was meant for? Sunday. The melody returned stronger, weaving itself into his breathing. Elias felt exhaustion settle into his bones, heavy and seductive. The idea of stopping, of lying down and letting everything end felt dangerously reasonable. He staggered to his feet and crossed the room, opening the windows despite the cold. Fresh air rushed in, sharp and biting. The melody faltered. Elias grabbed a portable recorder and spoke into it, voice strained but steady. This is not sadness, Issei Daluud. This is preservation of despair, an echo trap. Hearing his own voice grounded him. The light stabilized, but the song adapted. It softened. Images surfaced, unbidden faces from Elias's past. Moments of failure replayed with cruel clarity. The melody wrapped around them, offering absolution. It wasn't your fault, it whispered. Ingu. Trait. Elias bit down hard on his lip until he tasted blood. No, he said aloud. You don't get to forgive me. He shut down the archive sound system entirely, cutting power to the speakers. Silence fell not. True silence, but close enough. The song retreated, receding like a tide. When Elias finally sat down, shaking with exhaustion, he noticed something written on the whiteboard beneath the date. He had not written it. It will always be Sunday, for someone. Elias erased the words immediately, but the meaning lingered. The second song did not need to kill everyone. It only needed to ensure that somewhere, sometime, despair would find a listener on the right day. And as long as that condition was met, the melody would never truly end. By the time the third reel began to assert itself, Elias had learned the pattern well enough to fear it. Each recording announced its presence, not through sound alone, but through distortion, a subtle warping of reality that bent the world toward the story it carried. Heat for the burned woman. Time for the sorrowful song. Now, something else crept in. Rhythm. It arrived as repetition. The archive's ventilation system developed a mechanical thump that never quite synced with its normal cycle. Lights pulsed faintly, not flickering, but beating. Even Elias's footsteps began to fall into a steady, unnatural cadence as he moved through the halls. He tried to disrupt it. He walked faster, slower, erratically. The rhythm adjusted. That night, Elias found himself standing before the sealed box without remembering how he had gotten there. The third reel rested half-exposed, as if inviting removal. Its label was written in harsh, angular strokes, the ink pressed deep into the paper. The tape beneath was pristine warping, no discoloration. Cold, industrial, efficient. Elias did not put on headphones. He knew better now. The moment the tape spun, the room filled with a relentless drum pattern dry. Mechanical, unyielding. It was not loud, yet it dominated every other sound, pushing them aside. Beneath it, a low electronic drone vibrated steadily, like a machine that could not be switched off. Then came the voice, a scream. Not constant, but sudden, violent, ripping through the rhythm like metal tearing. It did not sound human at first. It sounded forced, as if dragged out of someone against their will. Elias flinched, despite himself. The scream came again. Then words emerged, spoken rapidly, breathless, almost panicked. A man's voice describing his life in fragments. Factory work, long hours, children crying, bills stacking endlessly. The rhythm never changed. The drone never soft. Pressure built in Elias's chest. The story accelerated. The voice cracked, rashed surfaced raw and uncontrolled. Images slammed into Elias's mind, blood on walls. A gunshot echoing in an empty room. Silence falling too quickly. Elias staggered back, knocking over equipment. The scream returned, closer now, sharper. Stop, Elias shouted, slamming his hand against the console. The machine did not respond. The rhythm began to synchronize with his heartbeat. Panic surged. Elias felt something dangerous stirring within himself, not an urge to harm, but an overwhelming sense of inevitability, as if every choice he had ever made had led to this moment, and nothing could divert the outcome now. The song was not telling a story, it was installing one. Elias clawed at his ears, but the sound was no longer external. It reverberated inside his skull, each beat carving space for despair and fury to coexist. The voice screamed again, longer this time. And then something unexpected happened. The scream fractured. It split into layers, multiple screams overlapping, some higher, some lower. Different throats, different ages. Elias realized with horror that the voice had stopped belonging to a single person. The rhythm fed them all. The lights overhead shattered simultaneously, plunging the archive into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the room in red. Elias dropped to his knees, gasping. "No more," he whispered, not as a command, but a plea. The scream cut off. Abrupt silence rushed in, deafening in its absence. The machine powered down on its own. Elias remained on the floor long after, shaking uncontrollably. When he finally dared to look up, he noticed something scrawled across the console screen, burned into the glass. This happened before. Elias understood. The third song did not create violence. It remembered it. It carried the emotional imprint of collapsed economic despair, suffocating pressure, the moment when restraint fails. Each listener did not merely hear the story. They inherited it, adding their own stress, their own anger, their own breaking point to the chorus. That was why the scream multiplied. Elias sealed the third reel inside a reinforced container, layering it with sound-dampening foam and electromagnetic shielding. His hands bled by the time he finished. As he cleaned the blood from the floor, a new fear took shape. If the earlier songs preserved pain and sorrow, and this one preserved rage, then whatever came next would not be content to stay contained. Somewhere deep within the sealed box, another reel shifted softly, as if responding to his thought. And for the first time since this began, Elias wondered not whether he could survive the songs, but whether anyone else could. The fourth reel did not announce itself with sound. It announced itself with absence. Elias noticed it first when the archive's ambient noise disappeared entirely. No ventilation hum. No electrical buzz. Even his own breathing felt muted, as if the air had thickened around him. The silence was not peaceful, it was compressed, heavy, straining under its own weight. He checked the monitors. All systems were active, yet the room felt acoustically dead, as though sound itself had been absorbed before it could exist. Elias approached the sealed box slowly. The fourth reel sat perfectly centered now, its label clean and formal, written in careful handwriting. No jagged strokes, no tremor, only precision. He lifted it. The tape vibrated faintly, like a living thing holding its breath. When he placed it into the machine, the speakers emitted a barely audible hiss, then erupted into chaos. Strings screamed, not melodies, but violent collisions of sound. Bows scraped against strings at impossible angles. Metallic shrieks clashed with piercing high frequencies, collapsing into deep, angry drones. The sound was overwhelming, yet strangely controlled, like a meticulously designed catastrophe. Elias clutched the edge of the table as the archive transformed. The walls seemed to stretch and bend. Shadows fractured into jagged shapes that twitched in time with the sound. The air itself vibrated violently, rattling equipment and setting his teeth on edge. Then came the images. Not visions, but experiences. A blinding flash, a city frozen mid-breath. Heat beyond comprehension. Elias screamed, but heard nothing. He felt his body dissolve, skin tightening, lungs burning, nerves firing all at once. Pain surged, then vanished, replaced by an unnatural numbness. The sound intensified. Within it, Elias sensed countless presences, thousands, maybe more, each locked in their final instant. No voices, no individuality. Just collective terror compressed into sound. This was not music. This was an event. The machine's timer ticked forward relentlessly, but Elias could not tell how much time had passed. Seconds stretched into eternities. The sound ebbed and surged, mimicking shock waves, collapse, aftermath. Then, gradually, the chaos softened. High frequencies thinned. Drones settled into a low, mournful hum. Elias collapsed to the floor, retching. When he could breathe again, he noticed the title etched faintly across the monitor, as if burned there by the sound itself. The sound faded completely. Silence returned. But it felt different. Now haunted, weighted. Elias lay on the cold floor, staring at the ceiling, tears streaming from eyes that felt scorched despite no physical injury. He understood immediately. This recording did not need a voice. It carried grief, too vast for language. Slowly, Elias forced himself upright. His hands shook as he ejected the tape. The reel was warm-hot, even but showed no sign of damage. Around him, the archive bore subtle changes. Several lights had shattered. Glass scattered across the floor. A thin layer of ash-coated surfaces, though nothing had burned. The smell of ozone lingered in the air. Elias checked his body. No burns, no wounds. Yet when he looked in the mirror near the recording booth, his reflection appeared slightly delayed, as if reality itself struggled to keep pace. "This isn't memory," he whispered hoarsely. "It's morning." He sealed the fourth reel with more care than any before, encasing it in layered insulation and lead shielding. Still, he suspected containment was an illusion. This song did not want release. It wanted remembrance. As Elias logged the recording, a chilling realization settled in. The previous songs fed on individual listeners' one woman's agony, countless private sorrows, a single man's rage multiplied. This one was different. It did not target the self. It targeted humanity. If played to enough people, it would not drive them mad or violent. It would erase perspective, reduce the world to ash and echoes. Elias backed away from the sealed box, heart pounding. 4 reels contained, 3 remained, and somewhere within the silence of the archive, the weight of an entire city pressed down on him, waiting for the next catastrophe to find a voice. The archive began to smell of oil and iron. Elias noticed it while reviewing structural blueprints on his tablet. An odor, sharp and industrial, completely out of place among concrete walls and sealed electronics. It grew stronger by the hour, clinging to his clothes, his hair, his hands. Washing did nothing. The smell followed him like a second skin. By the time he realized what it meant, it was already too late. The 5th night, after sealing the 4th reel, Elias found the archive subtly rearranged. Not dramatically, no shattered glass. No flickering lights, but wrong in quieter ways. Corridors felt longer, corners sharper, doors heavier, as if resisting being opened. The floor vibrated faintly beneath his feet in a steady, mechanical pulse, a machine rhythm. He stopped walking. The vibration continued. Elias swallowed and turned toward the sealed box. The 5th reel had shifted forward on its own. Its label was simple, Niat almost. Polita, no decoration, no warning. Just a name. He did not touch it. He didn't have to. The sound began without activation. A drum machine pattern emerged from the walls themselves, dry, repetitive, inescapable. It echoed through the archive, bouncing off surfaces, compressing space, until everything felt claustrophobic. Over it, a low electronic drone crept in, vibrating at a frequency that made Elias' vision blur. The archive doors slid shut simultaneously. Elias ran to the nearest one and pulled. Locked. The rhythm did not change. Then the voice arrived, not screaming yet. Talking. A young man's voice, flat with exhaustion, recounting workdays that bled into nights. Low wages. Children crying, a partner trying to stay hopeful. Each sentence felt truncated, clipped by time and pressure. The walls around Elias began to change. Concrete gave way to rusted metal. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. The air thickened with heat and dust. Elias stumbled backward, his heel catching on something unseen. He fell and landed on a factory floor. Rows of machines stretched endlessly in both directions, identical and unmoving, yet humming with potential energy. No exits, no windows, just repetition. The rhythm grew louder. The voice began to fracture. Words overlapped. Sentences collapsed into snarls of frustration. The drone intensified, pressing into Elias's skull like a vice. "No," Elias said, pushing himself upright. "This isn't happening." The factory ignored him. The voice snapped. A scream tore through the soundscape raw, violent, stripped of humanity. It echoed endlessly, ricocheting between machines, multiplying as it traveled. Each echo felt closer than the last. Elias clamped his hands over his ears. The scream continued. Images slammed into his mind, blood splattering against walls, small bodies collapsing, a gunshot reverberating far too loudly in an enclosed space. The scream reached a breaking point, and then shifted. It was no longer one scream. It was money. Layered voices burst through the rhythm. Different ages, different tones, all screaming in perfect sync. Elias realized with horror that these were not echoes. They were additions. Listeners. Every person who had heard the song and reached their breaking point had left something behind. A fragment of rage. A final scream. The song collected them, fused them into a single, expanding entity. The machines around Elias began to move. Belts rotated. Pistons slammed. Gears turned with brutal precision. The factory roared to life, its rhythm syncing perfectly with the song. Elias backed away until he hit a wall. The voice returned. No longer singular. No longer human. "This is how it ends," it said. Calm, resigned, absolute. "No," Elias whispered. "This is how it repeats." The scream surged again, overwhelming, suffocating. Elias felt his own emotions, destabilizing anger, bubbling up from places he didn't know existed. Frustrations long buried clawing their way to the surface. The song was not asking him to commit violence. It was teaching him how easy it would be. Elias bit down hard on his own hand, pain flaring bright and sharp. The factory flickered. The rhythm faltered for half a second. That was enough. Elias lunged forward, screaming not in fear, but defiance. The sound tore through the factory like a rupture. Everything collapsed. He slammed back onto the archive floor, gasping, the smell of oil fading rapidly. The machines were gone. The walls were concrete again. The fifth reel lay on the floor beside him. Silent. Elias sealed it immediately, hands shaking violently. As he secured the container, one truth burned itself into his mind. This song did not create monsters. It revealed them. It exposed the fragile line between endurance and collapse and ensured that once crossed, the moment would never be forgotten. Elias sank against the wall, exhausted beyond measure. 3 songs remained, and each one, he feared, would be less interested in individuals, and more interested in what humanity was willing to become. The 6th reel waited longer than the others. Days passed without distortion, without heat or rhythm or silence pressing in on Elias's thoughts. The archive felt almost normal again, and that frightened him more than any manifestation so far. He had learned to distrust calm. Calm was how the songs prepared their next move. When the change finally came, it was subtle. Elias caught himself humming. The tune was light, almost playful, an upbeat melody that clashed violently with the oppressive concrete walls around him. He stopped immediately, heart racing. He did not recognize the song, yet the melody felt familiar, as if it had always existed just beneath his awareness. He checked the sealed box. The 6 reels label was decorated. Childlike handwriting, careful curves. A small, hand-drawn smile in the corner. Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. The moment he touched the reel, the archive brightened. Not literally, the lights remained the same, but the atmosphere shifted, becoming unnervingly cheerful. The air felt lighter. The dread that had clung to him for weeks loosened its grip. That, Elias realized, was the trap. The song began with a gentle rhythm, almost catchy. A high, synthetic voice sang sweetly, its tone innocent, almost joyful. If Elias had heard it without context, he might have dismissed it as harmless. But beneath the melody, something else moved. A second layer whispered quietly, almost imperceptible, threading itself between notes. Elias felt it more than heard it, a presence leaning in close, speaking softly where only he could listen. The lyrics told a story. A child, a meeting, a promise of kindness. Elias's stomach twisted. The The sweetness curdled as the song progressed. The cheerful tone never faltered, but the words grew darker, slipping casually into cruelty, then into violence. The contrast was nauseating. The voice smiled as it described pain. Elias shut his eyes. He saw images he did not want to see, letters written in careful script, words chosen lovingly to describe unspeakable acts. A man who believed himself righteous, a monster who thought himself misunderstood. The song ended. Elias realized he had been holding his breath. He staggered away from the console, bile rising in his throat. This recording was different. It did not overwhelm the senses or collapse reality around him. It seduced. As he turned back toward the work table, he froze. An envelope lay there, yellowed, creased, old. Elias did not touch it. He already knew what it contained. The handwriting on the front was elegant, almost beautiful. Inside, the letter spoke in disturbing detail, written with unsettling calm. It described events with pride, with affection, as if recounting a fond memory. Elias dropped the letter as if it burned. "No," he whispered. The speakers crackled. The song began again, but backward. The melody twisted into something grotesque, notes dragging and distorting. The cheerful voice dissolved into a low, guttural whisper that spoke directly to him now. "I am honest when reversed," it said. Elias felt something brush past him, too close, too intimate. "Espun arohun." But the room was empty. The whisper continued. "You listen so well." Elias's hands trembled violently. He understood now why this song endured. It spread. It didn't rely on fear. It relied on curiosity, on the human need to understand evil. The song fed on attention, on analysis, on the desire to look deeper. Every listener who tried to understand left a piece of themselves behind a reaction, a shudder, a thought too dark to fully confront. That was how it survived. That was how it learned. Elias lunged forward and cut the power, ripping cables from the console. The whisper snapped off mid. Silence crashed down. The envelope crumbled into dust. Elias sealed the sixth reel with shaking hands, adding multiple locks, layers of shielding. Even a physical barrier bolted into the floor. He did not trust distance anymore. As Afini said, he noticed something carved into the underside of the work table, something that had not been there before. A message, etched carefully, lovingly. "Thank you for listening." Elias recoiled. He had faced grief, despair, rage, annihilation. But this was intimacy. This was the horror of being seen. 2 reels remained, and for the first time, Elias wondered if the final songs would not try to destroy him at all, but convince him to stay. The 7th reel did not wait to be chosen. Elias woke on the archive floor with no memory of falling asleep. The lights above him glowed dimly, tinted a sickly yellow, and his body felt wrong, heavy, distant, as if partially disconnected from itself. When he tried to sit up, a sharp pain flared in his chest and forced the air from his lungs. He lay still, heart hammering. Something was playing, not loudly, not even clearly, but the sound threaded through his body with unsettling intimacy, as though it were vibrating inside his ribcage rather than reaching him through the air. A guitar tone, sharp, tense, unresolved. Then a voice. It spoke calmly, almost casually, in the first person. "I'm lying here." Elias's vision blurred at the edges. The archive ceiling seemed too far away, warped slightly, as if viewed through glass. He tried to turn his head and found the effort exhausting, disproportionate to the movement. The voice continued, narrating sensations with unnerving clarity. Shallow breaths, cold spreading through limbs, awareness slipping in and out like a failing signal. Elias felt it happen to him as the words were spoken. His fingers tingled, then went numb. "No," he croaked, though his voice sounded distant, as if coming from somewhere down a long hallway. The song progressed steadily, unhurried. A melody edged with dread wound itself around the narration, each chord landing like a countdown. The voice described a body nearby, someone loved, unmoving, already gone. Elias's chest tightened painfully. He did not need to look. He knew, with absolute certainty, that if he turned his head, he would see someone lying beside him. The song did not threaten. It confirmed. A profound fear gripped Elias, not panic, but resignation. The overwhelming sense that events were already concluded, that resistance was pointless because the ending had already occurred. Dead on arrival. The phrase surfaced in his mind, unbidden, heavy with finality. The archive began to recede. Sound dampened further, as if Elias were sinking underwater. The music soft, becoming muffled, yet it remained impossibly close. The voice slowed, breaths growing weaker between sentences. Elias felt his heartbeat stutter. His vision narrowed to a dim tunnel of light. This is how it gets you, he thought dimly, by rehearsing the end. The song was not killing him. It was teaching his body how to die. With the last of his strength, Elias focused on something solid, something real. The cold, concrete beneath his palm. The ache in his shoulder. Pain meant presence. He forced air into his lungs, gasping violently. The movement sent agony tearing through his chest, but the sensation grounded him, anchoring him back into his body. The song faltered. The voice hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty crept into the narration. Elias seized the moment. No, he rasped aloud. You don't get my ending. He rolled onto his side, coughing, pain exploding through him. The archive snapped back into focus. The ceiling closer now. The lights harsher, the sound sharper. The music distorted, pitch bending wildly as if struggling to maintain coherence. The voice cracked. The guitar tone wavered. Elias dragged himself toward the console, every movement agony. His vision swam, but he kept moving, driven by raw defiance. He slammed his hand down on the emergency cutoff. The sound died instantly. Silence returned with brutal force. Elias collapsed beside the console, gasping for air, chest burning. His heart pounded erratically but strongly. Alive. When he finally dared to look beside him, there was nothing there. No body, no blood. Only the cold floor. The seventh reel lay in the player. Elias ejected it with shaking hands. The tape looked ordinary, no heat, no distortion, no movement. Innocent. That frightened him more than anything so far. He sealed the reel immediately, hands trembling uncontrollably. As he logged the incident, his thoughts crystallized into a single, terrifying understanding. This song did not preserve memory or emotion. It preserved process. It captured the experience of dying and replayed it, step by step, until the listener's body complied. Elias slumped back against the wall, exhausted beyond words. He had faced grief, despair, rage, annihilation, seduction, and now, mortality itself. Only one reel remained, and Elias knew, with chilling certainty, that the final song would not be about pain, or death, or evil. It would be about truth, and once heard, it would be impossible to unhear. Elias noticed it seeping through the archive vents, in thin, silvery strands, curling unnaturally against the direction of airflow. It carried no smell, no moisture, yet it softened edges, blurred distance, and made the concrete walls seem farther away than they should have been. He did not panic. That disturbed him. After everything he had endured, fear should have come easily. Instead, a strange calm settled over him, heavy and contemplative, as if the fog itself were anesthetizing his instincts. The sealed box stood open. Only one reel remained. Its label was deceptively plain-typed, not handwritten. No decoration. No warning. Just a location name that meant nothing to Elias at first glance. A street. A place. Ordinary. He reached for the reel and felt nothing unusual. No vibration. No resistance. It was light, almost fragile, like something that could be erased by accident. The moment it touched the machine, the fog thickened. Sound emerged slowly, as if hesitant to reveal itself. A low, droning organ tone filled the room, warm and distant. It wasn't frightening. It was nostalgic, the kind of sound that belonged to waiting rooms, late evenings, unfinished conversations. Elias felt his shoulders relax. Then the voices began. They were buried deep in the mixophane. He might have imagined them if he weren't trained to listen for hidden layers. Whispers drifted beneath the music, fragmented and indistinct, overlapping just enough to avoid clarity. Elias adjusted the levels. The whispers sharpened. Lost. Waiting. Not here anymore. The fog crept closer, pooling around his feet. Rising slowly, the archive lights dimmed until everything was bathed in a muted blue-gray glow. The music continued, looping gently, unhurried. Images surfaced in Elias's mind, not violent, not intrusive, keyed moments. Streets. At dusk, a house with lights on but no one answering the door. The feeling of being late without knowing for what. This is memory, Elias murmured. The song did not respond. The whispers shifted. A phrase emerged clearly now, spoken in a calm, almost bored tone. Listen carefully. Elias's breath caught. The voice was his. Not a recording, not an echo. Him. They spun around, but the fog obscured everything beyond a few meters. The music played on, serene and indifferent. Beneath it, the whispers reorganized, aligning into rhythm, cadence, intention. He's gone. He's gone. He's gone. Elias's heart pounded. No, he said aloud. I'm here. The music dipped slightly, as if acknowledging him. Then, unmistakably, a voice whispered close to his left. Ear clear, intimate, precise. You've been listening so hard, it said. You never noticed when we started listening back. The fog surged upward, swallowing the room. Elias's surroundings dissolved. The archive vanished, replaced by a familiar street under heavy mist. Streetlights glowed faintly, halos, bleeding into the fog. A house stood at the end of the road, windows lit warmly. Elias knew this place. He had never been there. The music played everywhere, now inside the fog, inside his head, inside the silence between his thoughts. It did not push. It did not demand. It waited. Elias walked forward. Each step felt inevitable, guided by something that knew exactly how far he would go. The whispers returned, clearer now, layered with subtle amusement. People love mysteries, they said, especially when they think they're solving them. Elias stopped. You're not a song, he said. You're a conclusion. The fog shifted, forming vague human silhouettes, faces without features, bodies without weight. They surrounded him at a respectful distance. We are confirmation, the voices replied. You searched for patterns, for meaning, for truth. The music swelled slightly. We are what you found. Elias understood. This final recording did not trap pain, or despair, or death. It trapped belief, rumor, interpretation, the human need to connect dots, to hear messages hidden where none were intended. This song fed on attention itself, growing stronger with every listener who leaned in a little too close. The whispers intensified. It's real. He's dead. It was always true. Elias felt something slipping, not his body, not his mind, but his certainty. The fog pressed in, heavy with implication. If he accepted what the song suggested, it would become real. Not because it was true, but because belief gave it weight. No, Elias said firmly. The word echoed, cutting cleanly through the soundscape. He closed his eyes and stopped listening. Not by covering his ears, not by fleeing, but by refusing to interpret. He let the sound exist without meaning, without pattern, without narrative. The whispers faltered. The fog thinned. The music wavered, losing cohesion, unraveling into disconnected tones. Elias opened his eyes. The archive returned slowly, solid and cold and real. The final reel spun uselessly, its influence collapsing without an attentive mind to sustain it. Elias ejected the tape and sealed it without ceremony. As the fog dissipated completely, one final whisper brushed his consciousness weak, fading, almost amused. Not everyone will ignore us. Elias locked the box, hands steady. He knew it was right. Somewhere, someday, someone would listen again. But not him. Rather, not anymore. The silence after the final reel was not relief. It was vacancy. Elias noticed it first in the way sound behaved differently around him. Footsteps echoed too long. Pages turned without the expected whisper. Even his own breathing seemed delayed, arriving a fraction of a second after his chest rose. The songs were sealed, contained as much as containment was possible, yet something fundamental had shifted. The archive no longer felt like a building. It felt like a remainder. Elias spent the next several days documenting obsessively not the recordings themselves, but the environmental readings, acoustic anomalies, structural changes that defied architectural logic. He slept in short bursts, always waking with a sense that something had almost happened. Almost. The sealed box had grown heavier. Not physically, its weight remained unchanged, but perceptually. Standing near it induced a pressure behind Elias's eyes, a subtle insistence that made concentration difficult. It was as if the box demanded acknowledgement simply by existing. On the 5th day, Elias noticed something wrong with the catalog. Files he had locked were now cross-referenced with records he had never accessed. Dates shifted. Metadata rewrote itself. The system began suggesting classifications that did not exist in any recognized archive standard. Haunted media. Activer listener responsive material. Elias shut the system down. That night, he dreamed of corridors branching endlessly, each lined with shelves identical to his own. Boxers stretched into darkness, everyone sealed, everyone humming faintly. Somewhere deep within the labyrinth, he heard footsteps that were not his. When he woke, the dream had not faded. The archive hallway was longer than before. Elias measured it twice, then 3 times. The numbers refused to agree. He followed the corridor until it ended not in a door but in another room, a room that had not existed on any blueprint. The walls were bare concrete, the lighting dim and industrial. At the center stood a desk. On it lay a manila folder. Elias did not want to open it. Anyway. Inside were reports typed, formal, stamped with institutional insignia from different countries, different decades. Each described incidents involving anomalous audio materials. Each concluded with the same recommendation: transfer to special collection. Access limited to designated custodian. At the bottom of the last page was a name: Elias Crow. The date was tomorrow. Cold spread through him. He backed away from the desk, heart pounding. The implication was unmistakable. The archive was not merely reacting to the songs, it was integrating them, adapting, creating infrastructure around their existence. Around him, Elias returned to the main room and stared at the sealed box. "You don't get to keep growing," he said aloud. The box did not respond, but the room did. A low hum rose beneath the floor, barely audible but unmistakable. Walls vibrated gently, like a structure settling or preparing. Elias understood then that sealing the songs had not ended their influence. It had centralized it. The archive had become an anchor point, a place where cursed sound could exist without immediately spreading. A containment vessel, and vessels required caretakers. "No," Elias whispered. He gathered his things, quickly notes, drives, personal effects, anything that felt like his. As he moved toward the exit, the lights dimmed incrementally, not failing but adjusting, guiding him subtly back toward the center of the building. The doors resisted when he pushed them, not locked, just reluctant. Elias stepped back, breathing hard. "This isn't my responsibility," he said. "I didn't create you." The hum deepened, resolving into something almost like a voice not spoken, but implied. "You found us?" Elias laughed bitterly. "That doesn't make me your keeper." He turned away from the exit and walked deliberately back to the sealed box. The pressure eased slightly, as if the building approved of the decision. Elias placed his hands on the lid. "I will not preserve you," he sighed evenly. "I will not study you. I will not listen." The hum wavered. "But I won't abandon you either," he continued, "because that's how you spread." The silence sharpened, attentive. "I'll bury you," Elias said. "In noise, in a place where you can exist without being heard." The archive lights flickered violently. Somewhere deep within the structure, something cracked. Elias did not wait for a response. He began preparing immediately, overriding drives with white noise, rerouting systems, flooding the archive's network with meaningless data. If the songs thrived on attention and interpretation, he would drown them in the opposite. Mediocrity, static, endless, unremarkable sound. As dawn approached, Elias worked without pause, hands steady, resolved hardening. He knew this was not a victory, it was a compromise. The songs would not die, but neither would they be allowed to speak. And as the archive filled with noise that meant nothing at all, Elias accepted the role he had been forced into, not as a listener, not as a believer, but as the one who made sure the truth was buried beneath silence no one would ever bother to hear. Elias did not mark the passage of time anymore. Days and nights dissolved into a continuous hum of white noise, servers running endlessly, tape machines looping recordings so bland and meaningless that even memory refused to cling to them. Wind through empty streets, unedited room tone, hours of nothing happening at all. The archive resisted at first. Systems failed inexplicably. Power rerouted itself. Files Elias deleted, returned under different names. Once, he caught a melody, trying to surface through the static Juste fragment. Barelli, formed, but he crushed it beneath another layer of noise before it could take shape. He learned quickly. The cursed songs did not fight openly anymore. They adapted. He waited. Elias understood now what the archive truly was. Not a prison. A threshold. Sound, when listened to with enough intent, ceased to be vibration and became presence. The 7 songs were not supernatural entities in the traditional sense. They were patterns, self-sustaining structures that required perception to remain coherent. As long as someone listened, they existed. As long as someone interpreted, they grew. So, Elias stopped interpreting. Weeks passed. Perhaps months. The archive settled into an uneasy equilibrium. The pressure behind Elias's eyes lessened. The sealed box no longer pulsed with implication. For the first time since this began, he believed he might have succeeded. Then the message arrived. Not on a screen, not on paper, in sound. Creepy Dayli. A single anomaly surfaced within the white noise, barely detectable, buried deep in hours of meaningless audio. Elias found it during a routine integrity check. At first, he almost missed it. A pause, a perfect absence of sound lasting less than half a second. Elias froze. Silence, true silence, did not exist in recordings. He isolated the segment, enhanced it, played it again. Within the pause, something whispered. Not words. A name. His name. Elias leaned back slowly, heart pounding. So, he said quietly, this is it. The realization came with brutal clarity. The songs had stopped trying to escape the archive. They no longer needed to. They had found stability. In him, Elias was the constant. The observer, the one who knew their structure, their weaknesses, their nature. Even if he refused to listen actively, his awareness alone was enough to anchor them. He was no longer just a custodian. He was the final recording. That night, Elias stood alone in the archive's central room. The sealed box rested on the table, inert and ordinary. For the first time, it looked small. I won't pass you on, Elias said aloud. There will be no next listener. The archive hummed softly, almost contemplative. He knew what had to be done. Elias initiated the final protocol he had been building in secret, not deletion, not destruction, but convergence. He rerouted every system, every machine, every recording path toward a single endpoint. Himself, microphones, activated across the building, not to capture speech or music but to capture presence, breath, heartbeat, neural, noise, the sound of a living human existing without interpretation. Elias sat down in the center of the room and closed his eyes. "I'm listening," he said, not to the songs, but to the world as it was. Concrete settling, air moving, blood flowing. The archive responded. Not with violence, not with fear. Wheat, release. The cursed patterns began to collapse inward, stripped of narrative, stripped of audience. Pain without a listener was just sensation. Despair without belief was only chemistry. Death without rehearsal was final end. Therefore, silent, the sealed box cracked not outward, but inward, folding in on itself like a sound wave canceling its own echo. Elias felt the pressure lift. The hum faded. For the first time in his life, he experienced absolute quiet, not the absence of sound, but the absence of meaning imposed upon it. When the system shut down, it did so gently. No alarms, no distortion, just an ending. Morning light filtered through the archive's upper windows Elias did not remember existing before. The building felt smaller now. Finite. Elias stood slowly. Was alone. The songs were gone, not destroyed, but resolved, collapsed into a single, unremarkable human moment that would never be replayed. Elias left the archive that day. He did not lock the door. Years later, rumors would circulate online about cursed songs, forbidden recordings, mysteries buried in sound. People would speculate, analyze, listen too closely. They would find nothing, because the truth had already been heard, and it had chosen, at last, to remain silent.